Well, good morning again. In his book, There I Go Again, Stephen Mosley tells about Anna Pavlova, a Russian ballet superstar of the early 1900s. Ms. Pavlova has been acclaimed as the greatest ballerina of all time. Her most memorable performance, however, took place after her death. Anna was to play the role she made famous, the Dying Swan, at the Apollo Theatre in London. Tragically, she succumbed to pneumonia and died 2 days before the event. Still, on the appointed night, a crowd of her fans packed the Apollo Theatre. The orchestra began playing, the curtain rose, a spotlight flashed through the dark, and the entire audience rose to its feet. They all stood gazing at a pool of light wandering around the stage, accompanied by the orchestral theme. As the light danced and the orchestra played, they remembered Anna Pavlova. In their hearts, they could see her on the stage, dressed in white, with flashing dark eyes. And when the music stopped at last, they gave the vanished Anna a thunderous ovation that echoed on in the night. An empty stage with only a spotlight, but in their hearts, she was alive and dancing. For some, this is the experience of Easter. The Lord was crucified, he died, as all of us will one day die. And he was laid in a borrowed tomb. But in the hearts of his disciples, the Lord of the dance lives forever. An empty stage, not an empty tomb. But this is not the testimony of the New Testament. Yes, he was crucified. Yes, he did die. And yes, he was laid in a borrowed tomb. But when the women and later his disciples came to visit his tomb on the third day, the stone had been rolled away. The borrowed tomb was empty. The grave clothes that had been wound around his blood-stained body were neatly folded and laid to the side. He was not there. He was alive. Then he met with them, dined with them, reassured them, not as a mere memory dancing in a spotlight, but as a real, live person. This is the Easter story. Not an empty stage, but an empty tomb. Is this important? You bet it is. Ultimately, you and I have a choice to make. It is the most important choice that we will ever face. It is whether to accept the empty stage or to accept the empty tomb. Does the Lord of the dance merely dance in the hearts of his disciples, or is he, in fact, the life that will never, never die? Remember Woody Allen's comic assessment? I don't want to achieve immortality through my work, he said. I want to achieve immortality by not dying. Which is it? Are we immortal because there are those who will remember and cherish the fact that we once walked this vale of tears? Or are we immortal because after Christ was cut down from the cross, he leapt up high and has once and forever battered down the gates of death? Death is often an ugly experience. It means separation and loss and heartache beyond description. Oh, we try to pretend it's not so. Has anyone here ever heard of Miss Martin Van Butchel? I'd be surprised if anyone has. She's been dead for over 200 years. But Miss Butchel left a will, and it specified that on her death, her husband had control of her fortune only as long as her body remained above the ground. I don't know what she had against being buried, but that was her stipulation. Now, mausoleums were little known at the time, so the husband hired the Scottish anatomist William Hunter to embalm his dead wife. Then he dressed her in a fashionable attire and put her on display in the family parlor. daily visiting hours were held for those who wished to view the corpse inside a glass-lidded coffin. News of how lifelike Miss Butchell looked spread, and the art of undertaking quickly became a thriving business. Families were encouraged to soften the loss of loved ones through embalming the person to look as lifelike as possible. Some embalmers, in order to drum up new business, took their prized corpses on tour, exhibiting embalmed bodies in the windows of barber shops, in public halls, and at county fairs, so that the rural folk could get a glimpse of the latest in funeral treatment. And the public was duly impressed. We disguise death in many ways. Through our language, for example. He passed away. She's gone. Mother's no longer with us. We dress the deceased in the finest suit or her prettiest dress. We make use of the embalmer's art. Oftentimes we retreat into memories of better days. Anything to keep us from dealing with the finality of death. And the truth is, death is ugly if Easter is merely a spotlight on an empty stage, and the Lord of the dance is merely living in our hearts. But if Easter is about an empty tomb, and if it is about a risen Christ who leads us all in the dance of life, then death is an entirely different matter. Many of you know of Tony Campolo. He's one of the most entertaining and thought-provoking Christian speakers in America today. Many of you know about his love for his home church, Mount Carmel Baptist Church in West Philadelphia, which happens to be a predominantly black church. Tony Campolo tells about the first funeral he attended at Mount Carmel when he was 16 years old. Clarence, a friend of his, had been killed in a subway train accident. At the beginning of the service, says Campolo, the pastor brilliantly expounded upon what the Bible says about the promise of the resurrection and the joys of being with Christ, and he had the congregation enthralled. Then he came down from his pulpit and went over to the right side of the sanctuary where the family of Tony's dead friend was seated in the first 3 rows. And he comforted them from the 14th chapter of John. Let not your heart be troubled, he said. You believe in God. Believe also in me, said Jesus. Clarence has gone to heavenly mansions. And then the pastor did a most unusual thing. For the last 20 minutes of the sermon, he actually preached to the open casket. He yelled at the corpse, Clarence! Clarence! He said it with such authority that Tony Campolo says he would not have been surprised if there had been an answer. The pastor said, Clarence, there were a lot of things we should have said to you that we never said to you. You got away too fast, Clarence. You got away too fast. He went down this litany of beautiful things that Clarence had done for people. And when he finished, he said, That's it, Clarence. There's nothing more to say. When there's nothing more to say, there's only one thing to say. Good night. Good night, Clarence. And with that, he grabbed the lid of the casket and slammed it shut. Boom! Good night, Clarence. Shockwaves went over the congregation. Then a beautiful smile slowly lit up the pastor's face, and he shouted, Good night, Clarence. Good night. Because I know that God is going to give you a good morning. And with that, the choir stood and started singing, On that great morning we shall rise, we shall rise. As the choir sang, everyone in the congregation rose to their feet and started singing it with them. On that great getting up morning we shall rise, we shall rise. There was clapping and crying, but the tears were tears of laughter. There was hugging and dancing. They were literally dancing in the aisles. Celebration had broken out in the face of death. Something of a party that is to come had broken into that church. Death had been swallowed up in victory, and they knew the joy of the Lord, a joy that in the face of death laughs and sings and dances, for there is no sting to death. Clarence wasn't dancing in their hearts. He was dancing with the risen Christ. And so there was dancing in the aisles. And that's the message of Easter. Death has been conquered. And so has life. Because of what happened that first Easter Sunday, you and I can walk in freedom and dignity and joy. That prince of the pulpit, Charles Hadley Spurgeon, was walking the streets of London, deep in thought, when he saw a young street boy. The lad was carrying an old, bent bird cage, and inside was a tiny field sparrow. Spurgeon stopped the boy and asked him what he was going to do with the bird. "Well," the boy said, "I think I'll play with it for a while, and then when I'm tired of playing with it, I think I'll kill it." He made that last comment with a wicked grin. Moved with compassion for the bird, Spurgeon asked, "How much would you sell me that bird for?" "You don't want this bird, mister," the boy said with a chuckle. "It's just a bleating field sparrow." But when he saw the old gentleman was serious, he said, "You can have this bird for £2. Now, £2 at that time would be worth more than $100 today, an astronomical price for a bird worth only pennies. Spurgeon paid the price and let the bird go. The next morning, Easter Sunday morning, an empty birdcage sat on the pulpit of the great Metropolitan Tabernacle where Spurgeon preached. "Let me tell you about this cage," Spurgeon said as he began this sermon. Then he recounted the story about the little boy and how he had purchased the bird from him at such a high cost. "I tell you this story," he said, "because that's just what Jesus did for us. You see, an evil specter called sin had us caged up and unable to escape. But then Jesus came up to sin and said, 'What are you going to do with all those people in that cage?' 'These people,' Sin answered with a laugh, 'I'm going to teach them to hate each other. Then I'll play with them until I'm tired of them, and then I'll kill them.' 'How much to buy them back?' Jesus said. With a sly grin, Sin said, 'You don't want these people, Jesus. They'll only hate you and spit on you. They'll even nail you to a cross. But if you do want to buy them, it'll cost you all your tears and all your blood, your very life.'" Spurgeon concluded, "That, ladies and gentlemen, is just what Jesus did for us on the cross. He paid the ultimate, immeasurable price for all who would believe, that we might be free from an inescapable penalty of death. That is the message of Easter. Death has been overcome, but so is life. You and I can be free, free as that bird delivered from its cage. We can walk in dignity and joy, with purpose and power, because Christ is stronger than sin and the grave." A young boy came home after Sunday school and was asked by his grandmother what he learned that day. He said, "God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall have everlasting life." And that's the good news for us today. We can have both everlasting and everlasting life. We are free. Anna Pavlova danced in the hearts of the people who loved her and admired her. The resurrection of Jesus was something more. He is alive. He is the Lord of the dance. And because he is, there can be dancing in the aisles. Will you please pray with me? We thank you, O God, for the revelation of Easter, that you have not left your world, but in raising Christ, the new creation is now begun. Stay with us through the experiences of death and resurrection in our own lives until you raise us from graves of pain and suffering to new life and hope. Amen.